know how platforms like Facebook, Netflix, and Airbnb manage to handle absolutely massive amounts of data and constant user interactions, all without constantly refreshing the page? Well, they rely on a framework that pretty much revolutionized web development. Today, we're looking at React. It's a tool that heavily favors flexibility, speed, and, above all, modularity. But how does it actually work under the hood? And more importantly, how do you go from a completely blank screen to a fully dynamic, interactive application?
All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to our explainer on the fundamentals of React. To make this as intuitive as possible, we're going to treat learning React exactly like building a modern, high-tech house from the ground up. We aren't just looking at the theory here. We're going to actually pour the digital concrete, frame the walls, and wire up the electricity. By the time we wrap up, you'll understand exactly how the modern web is built. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a blueprint, lay our foundation with the right workspace tools, and then survey our newly generated file structure. After that, we'll lay our very first component brick, add the wiring to make those components dynamic, and finally look at how we can expand this house into a massive digital skyscraper. Part 1. The blueprint. Why React changes everything. Before you even swing a hammer, you really need to understand the architecture. React's core philosophy completely shifts how we think about web pages. Instead of building one massive interconnected page, React asks us to build small, isolated pieces that stack together. It's built entirely around this ecosystem of components, these reusable, modular pieces of code. If you've got a navigation bar, that's a component. A user profile, also a component. The real magic here is that React is optimized to render and update only the specific components that need it when data changes. Instead of reloading the whole page and making your user wait around, React intelligently refreshes just the essential sections. It's kind of like changing a single light bulb without having to rewire the entire house. Section 2. Laying the foundation, setting up your workspace. Okay, before writing a single line of code, we have to prepare the site. We need the right tools installed locally. Setting up your workspace takes 3 quick steps, and it honestly saves us from the traditional hair-pulling headaches of web dev setup. First, you need Node.js installed. This is the underlying environment so your machine actually understands modern JavaScript tooling. Second, open up your terminal and verify that installation by typing node-v and npm-v. And third, the absolute magic command, npx create React app. Think of npx as your automated bulldozer and construction crew. In one single command, it builds out all the folders, files, and dependencies you need to start coding immediately. It literally saves you hours of manual setup. Section 3. Surveying the site, decoding the folder structure. Once that npx command actually finishes running, you might feel a little overwhelmed by all the files it just spit out. Don't panic. Just ignore that massive node_modules folder for now. The 2 most important folders you need to care about are public and source. The source, or source folder, is where almost all of your daily project code is going to live. This is where you build your components. Webpack, which is a module bundler working quietly behind the scenes, will constantly check this source directory to make sure your app rebuilds instantly every single time you hit save. But right before we dive into that SRC folder, let's peek at a file inside the public folder, index.html. Inside this file, there is essentially a single line of code that matters. It's a div with the ID of root. The big takeaway here is that you rarely, if ever, edit this index.html file. Its main job is simply to host this empty root div. Meanwhile, over in your JavaScript files, React is busy building your entire application, and it ultimately just injects that massive dynamic app straight into this single root anchor point. Section 4. Laying the first brick, building your first components. Time to actually build something. We're going to create a new file in our SRC folder and call it employee.js. This is our very first component. Once we write the code for it, we have to tell our main application to use it. So in your app.js file, you just drop an import statement at the top to bring the employee component in. Then you render it using what looks basically like a custom HTML tag, an opening bracket, the word employee, a // and a closing bracket. Notice how it's just one clean self-closing tag? That concise syntax is super preferred here for readability. And boom, you've just laid your first brick. You can copy and paste that employee tag 100 times now, and React will render 100 employees on the screen instantly. Section 5. Adding the wiring, powering up with props. Now, having 100 identical employees isn't exactly useful, right? We want our house to be dynamic. We want electricity and plumbing running through those walls. In React, we pull this off using something called props. Props is just short for properties. By passing props into our component, we give each iteration totally unique data. So, by rendering the employee component and attaching custom attributes like name equals Diana and role equals engineer, the component reads those props and updates the display. You don't have to rewrite the entire block of code just to change a name or a job title. It's one component blueprint with infinite unique variations. But what if we want Diana's role to change interactively while the user is actually clicking around the site? For that, we need hooks. A hook is a built-in React function that lets you add state, which basically means memory, to your application. All hooks start with the word use. The most common one you're going to rely on is use state. With hooks, you completely avoid writing complex class structures. You just plug straight into React's powerful functionality. Let's break down the anatomy of how use state actually works. First up, you import it at the top of your file. Then you set up an array with 2 items. The first item, role, is the current value of your variable. The second item, setRole, is the specific function you call whenever you need to change that value. Finally, you set the default state right inside the parentheses. Let's say GIS analyst for this example. Now watch how incredibly fast this is. Whenever your user types into a form and triggers that setRole function, React instantly updates the role variable and seamlessly, in the blink of an eye, re-renders just that specific part of the screen. Section 6, expanding the house. What's next in React? So we've poured the foundation, laid our components, and wired them up with props and state. But the React framework is built to handle massive skyscrapers. What you've learned today is just the gateway. The source material outlines some seriously incredible advanced topics waiting for you. You'll learn to map through arrays to generate components dynamically in loops. You'll install Tailwind CSS for gorgeous utility styling. You can connect your front end to a robust Django REST API backend. You'll even handle secure user logins with JWT authentication and visualize data using Chart.js. The whole ecosystem is just endlessly expandable. At the end of the day, React is way more than just a library. It's a completely different way of thinking about how users interact with the digital world. By breaking down complex web pages into simple, manageable components, you get total control over the architecture of your apps. So now that your foundation is poured and the wiring is hot, what are you going to build with your very first React component? Open up that terminal, run that npx command, and let's find out.